Hi y'all, welcome back. So every few years, I feel like the internet rediscovers or reignites their passion or love or hatred of the traditional or trad wife content creator or trad wife influencer. This cycle, the internet's division, has primarily focused on the content creators that are trad wives, including Nara Smith and ballerina farm mom named Hannah Nealman. And while this isn't the first time that trad wife influencers and content has gained popularity on the internet, it certainly feels like this time around, the trad wife influencers have gained significant momentum and mainstream attention due to their new reach on TikTok. And with this newfound attention, with this cycle of trad wife influencers, comes a renewed effort and renewed criticism about the messaging that's happening around trad wife influencers. Now, here's the thing. Just by doing a cursory glance at the reaction to trad wife content and content creators on the internet, you can see that there's a very strong reaction to this form of content, with people mainly on the political left decrying these women as perverse recreations of Stepford wives, while the politically leaning right defend these women, saying they represent American values. It seems like with trad wife content, you either hate it or you love it. So like with other people in media, which I'm sure you've seen other videos about this, I wanted to figure out what the deal is with this trad wife content. Specifically, I wanted to view these creators from a feminist lens. Are these trad wife influencers antithetical to the feminist movement, or are these women and their content really the epitome of a feminist dream? So let's dive into it. So before we get into these trad wife influencers and take a look at their content through a feminist lens, let's back it up and describe the trad wife phenomena, what it is and what it means to be a trad wife. So a trad wife, otherwise known as a traditional wife, is a Western subculture that values the traditional gender roles in the home and in marriage. A crucial part of the trad wife subculture is the importance of feminine submission to the patriarchy, conservative values, and the general adherence to strict Christian fundamentalist philosophies and teachings. An additional element of this trad wife subculture is this role-playing within the subculture, where trad wives will often role-play as a wife from the 1950s or 60s in the United States or in the West. Specifically, trad wife influencers will include references to traditional Americana from the 50s by wearing certain dresses, aprons, pearls, to kind of harken back to this style of dress. This sort of recreation of the 1950s and 60s look and aesthetic is seemingly an homage to the heyday of a traditional wife in the West, in some sort of codified ritual to look and act the part. Although some trad wife influencers dress in this Americana style in alignment with that type of aesthetic, it is not necessarily a part of the trad wife aesthetic or culture. Rather, this type of role-playing is just an extreme version of commitment to the role. As a note, sometimes this role-playing of the 1950s and 60s can extend past the trad wife and actually leak into the children, the homes, and the other partners. For example, Lucky Blue Smith and their partner Nara Smith, who is the traditional wife who's like kind of gaining popularity right now, always seems to be like role-playing as one of the boys from the Outsiders novel, so it's not just the wives. But enough about the aesthetic. Let's turn our attention to the philosophical underpinnings of the traditional wife. As I mentioned, a trad wife usually holds firm to evangelical biblical teachings and conservative values to help them understand their place within the world. And religion actually plays a really interesting role within these trad wife cultures and households, with a lot of traditional wives either being evangelical, Christian, or Mormons. And I want to be careful to note something here, and first everything moving forward, that although these women are religious and use biblical teachings as inspiration for aspects of their movement, they are actually just using a very specific interpretation of the Bible that fits their worldview. I'm not a biblical scholar, so I won't delve too deep into the religious teachings in the Bible, but basically the Bible allows for significant interpretation, and every person, minister, and congregation may be led to interpret the Bible in very different ways. And that's what we see today with the modern Christian conservative movement, is that the interpretation of the Bible is very different depending on the sect or the person who's reading it. In the case of many of the trad wives, they use a strict evangelical interpretation to help vindicate their worldview or their partner's worldview or their family religion's worldview. They interpret the Bible strictly when it comes to womanhood, the role of men and women, gender roles, and the importance of modesty, among other things. Although they use the Bible as a cornerstone for their beliefs, a lot of the tradwives and the tradwife content is 1 part religion and 2 parts conservative values. Tradwife influencers place value on strict gender roles, like I mentioned. They define women's roles as a homemaker and the stay-at-home mother, while the men are usually the providers and the breadwinners. In tradwife world, the woman should always dress modestly and be subservient to their husbands and, most importantly, to their God. And a good woman should steer clear of the secular world and not give in to hookup culture or things like the feminist movement or female empowerment, because those are all tied to secularism. All of these values are closely aligned to the modern right-wing movement in the Western world. Tradwives usually also perpetuate other right-wing stances, such as a repudiation of the LGBTQ community and the restriction of female reproductive rights, which, although these are a little bit more subtle, they are certainly there. And here it's important to note the rise of tradwife influencers and how it coincides with the fall of Roe v. Wade. After the Dobbs decision, there was a sudden resurgence of these types of right-wing family-centric content creators. This is not a coincidence that tradwife influencers who glamorize the lifestyle of having a nuclear family and being a stay-at-home mom are growing in popularity when women's reproductive rights in the US are under constant attack. These tradwife influencers definitely push the pro-life agenda of the Conservative Party and represent the future that people on the alt-right and the Conservative Party right wing of the United States want to see emulated across the country. They are housewives who have lots of children who will then go on to repopulate with a bunch of conservative values. These 2 streams of influence often get blurred, with religious values being mixed up for conservative values and vice versa. We see this a lot just outside of this sphere, that Christian and conservative values become just mixed and intermingled, even though they are separate entities. And at the end of the day, the tradwife movement is the fuzzy end product of conservative values mixed with religious undertones. However, there should be no mistake that the tradwife movement, and specifically tradwife content creators, are a form of ministry. Tradwives, and especially tradwife influencers, are attempting to glamorize the lifestyle and recruit people into their mission. In many ways, the tradwife content creator operates as a missionary with the goal of converting people, usually younger women, into their belief systems. In times like these where the economy's bad, people are unhappy with their lives, and the world seems chaotic and uncertain, it is easy to see how tradwife influencers have exploded in popularity. They heavily rely on characterizing their lives as easy and harkening back to the good old days, indoctrinating people to a lifestyle that simply doesn't exist anymore. These tradwife influencers have a message, a mission, a willing congregation. But how does this tradwife content and lifestyle interplay with feminism? Are these women simply bringing in the 4th or new wave of feminism? Okay, before we get into that question and dive more deeply into how tradwife content intersects with feminism and the feminism movement, I think it would be important to have like a very brief minimal crash course on what feminism is. And I think it's important to orient ourselves to feminism because so many people misinterpret what feminism is and conflate it with misandry, which is like the hatred of men, which is not entirely what it is. On the surface level, feminism is a belief in the social, economic, and political equality of all genders. According to the International Women's Development Agency, feminism is about respecting diverse women's experiences, identities, knowledge, and strengths, and striving to empower all women to realize their full rights with the goal of allowing women to have the same opportunities as men. There have technically been 4 waves or movements of feminism, each having their own specific goals and objectives, but all kind of geared towards the ultimate goal of gender equality. And although I won't go into heavy detail about each wave, I do think it's important to consider how the history of the feminist movement impacts where we are today. So in the briefest of terms, the first wave of feminism was mainly focused on the women's suffrage or voting rights. The second wave focused on women's empowerment and included women's rights gains, including the Roe v. Wade decision. The third wave of feminism was formed as a reaction to the first and second waves, which was mostly focused on the white woman's empowerment movement, whereas the third movement really focused and introduced the intersectional feminism, women's sexuality, and female individuality. reality. Finally, the current or the fourth wave of feminism was created in response to the Me Too movement. Admittedly, this newest and fourth wave is a little bit more directionless and less defined. Some scholars say the fourth wave of feminism is focused about internet feminism. Some people believe it's about dismantling systems of female oppression, but I think the future of the feminist movement and this fourth wave remains to be seen. Okay, so now that we have a little bit of background of what the different types of feminist movements entailed, what feminism means, let's move into how it intersects with the tradwife movement and other social movements associated with the traditional wife movement. So tradwives and their intersection and interaction with feminism and the modern feminist movement is quite complex. And honestly, tradwives and their interplay with feminism is why I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with seeing these videos from tradwife influencers. Something seems off, almost dystopian with these tradwife content creators, but nobody can really place their finger on what's wrong with this picture. Well, I think that these tradwives and the tradwife influencers we see on social media are making people grapple with their social and world views. For example, in the past century, we've witnessed enormous strides in the female empowerment movement, and as a woman myself, I have reaped the benefits, and a lot of women I know have reaped the benefits of other women coming before me and paving the way. So seeing someone take a step backwards, in my opinion, from those hard-fought rights and privileges to return back to the patriarchal ideal of womanhood is discouraging for most women, including myself. Seeing women forsake their liberties and turn their back on other people fighting for their right to vote, their right to reproductive rights, the right to have financial accounts in their name, the right to have no-fault divorces, the list goes on, and the ability for some women to turn their back on those people in that fight just seems very depressing. In addition to the feeling like those trad wives and trad women are shunning gender camaraderie, you also have to confront your own thoughts about what feminism means to you. For example, a lot of people's practice with feminism includes the women and females' right to self-determination and choice. So the waters become muddy when you see these women, these traditional wives, seem to be choosing a lifestyle of tradition for themselves. And isn't the whole point of the feminist movement to encourage female freedom and the freedom of choice? And to this, I would say that although my version of feminism gives women the right to choose, I think tradwives and the content they produce becomes murky because of the publicizing of a lifestyle that really isn't based in reality. And there's also some question of whether or not these traditional wives are actually being given the freedom to choose this lifestyle for themselves instead of being told from the top down or from the person that they marry, their partner, their husband, their father, that this is the lifestyle that they are destined to be part of. So it's really tricky to see whether or not this is actually their choice. And this leads to the third issue. So not only are tradwives potentially regressing the achievements and accomplishments of the feminist movement, stunting the collective empowerment of all women, they are also selling falsehoods to impressionable young women. Looping back to the idea of religion and its intersection with traditional wives, this is really where the ministry part of the tradwife movement kicks in. Tradwives, and especially content creators who are tradwives, are peddling a falsehood. They set up their camera, clean kitchen, to hand make perfect food for their perfect children. All of this posturing for the camera is done intentionally to sell the image of perfection. In reality, motherhood and becoming a stay-at-home mother is an admirable path for a lot of women, but to present it as an easier life is just not honest. Motherhood is a full-time job, as many mothers will like to tell you, and to remove the labor of motherhood and to make it seem easy is not only disingenuous, but a powerful tool used by the patriarchy to discredit women who choose to be mothers. Motherhood, homemaking, it's a hard business and it takes a lot of skill, time, and patience. It is not all glamorous, and women making it seem easy are not being honest. But that is not the point of their content. They are paid to make it seem easy to become a stay-at-home mother, stay-at-home wife, and that being submissive and beholden to men, and men holding their purse strings and holding everything that they do with their lives, is so much of a simpler life. That's what they're paid to do. That's the lifestyle that they are paid to emulate, show to young, impressionable audience members. They are quite literally being paid to promote a fantasy of alt-right Christian motherhood and homemaking, and all of the ideals they preach feed right into the ideology ideology of the patriarchy. And it's easy to trace the line from trad wives and their content to the ideals and the members of the alt-right movement. The alt-right movement is a white nationalist movement that highlights the teachings of the Western far-right movement. In the United States, the majority of the teaching from the far right overlap with conservative Christian fascist ideology. Most of the ideology of the alt-right movement is extremely heinous stuff rooted in racism, anti-Semitism, misogyny, transphobia, and homophobia. Basically, if you're not white and you're also not aligned with strict conservative Christian values, then you are woke and you're not good for society in the views of the alt-right members and movement. The leaders and followers of the alt-right movement are Christian white nationalists who seek to further divide people by espousing incendiary teachings and participating in radical, hate-filled marches meant to intimidate and create fear. Now, you might be thinking that Nara Smith is nowhere near these alt-right people, and the Ballerina Farm is not associated with these groups. But make no mistake, trad wives and their content is just the alt-right movement with cuter, more feminine packaging. These trad wife content creators heavily overlap with the teaching of the alt-right movement, but they keep it a little bit more subtle, a little bit more palatable. Instead of preaching at people, they create pleasant videos and gently beckon people into their lifestyle. A life where men control their finances, control their days, and control their voice, and most of all, control every aspect of their lives. They position the wife, the mother, the homemaker as a natural state for women and the culmination of a woman's life. They strip the woman of having the virtue of individuality and intrinsically tie her worth to her home. Once her individuality and freedom is tied to the man in the household, then they remove the value of her labor and to her hard work, making her work as a homemaker seem like a second-class or second-hand job, further stripping her from her power. In essence, the traditional wife is a mold that they desire all women to fit inside. Okay, switch outfits. It's a completely different day, but we're just going to keep it moving. So besides the ways the trad wives play into their character decided for them by the patriarchy, the traditional wife also has a lot of intersection with the racist alt-right ideology, specifically by harkening back to the 1950s and 60s, a time period where not only did white women not have as many rights, but communities of color were stripped away of their agency, were pushed and marginalized to the fringes of society, and oppressed on a regular basis. In general, there were less rights for people in communities of color, and women who are traditional wives like to roleplay of this time. And the trad wives explicitly uphold nationalistic ideas of an easier and a better time, but only for white people. Additionally, a great number of trad wives believe in the theory of the Great Replacement, which I'm not going to go into super in-depth detail with, but if you want to look it up, you can look it up. But basically, it is a white nationalist idea that the white people in the United States are being replaced by people of color, people who are migrating from other countries, and are replacing white babies because they have higher birth rates. It's a really messed up and racist ideology, but a lot of trad wives feed into this and believe in this. And this fear-mongering idea that is geared towards white nationalism and white power is actually something that is perpetuated by trad wives. And again, this is where the ministry aspect of trad wifism comes to light. Most of the traditional wives and their audiences are white women, and these trad wives are promoting the fact that more white women specifically should stay at home, become stay-at-home mothers, and raise more white babies, which again feeds into this mythology that there is a great replacement happening, and that by becoming a traditional wife and encouraging women and also restricting women's reproductive rights, that they are actually negating that great replacement myth. And you might be thinking, some people don't believe that. And although a lot of the trad wives don't explicitly come out and say that this is what they believe in, it has been named by trad wife advocates in the past as a main mission of their trad wifism. In general, trad wives have a scary history of aligning with white nationalists and alt-right conspiracy theorists, but once again, they just have a cutesy and more feminine packaging. So what can we conclude from all of this? What can we take away from the trad wife movement? And are trad wives truly feminist icons? Well, everyone can make their own opinions and assumptions, but I think that this trad wifism and it becoming more popular after the fall of Roe v. Wade is a concerning trend for our whole entire nation. Over the past 10 years, we've really seen an attack on reproductive rights for women. And I know that's a hot button issue and we can discuss that more in depth at a different time, but it's just important and really interesting to look at the rise of these trad wife influencers coinciding with the loss of reproductive rights. They and their lifestyle is a portrayal of perfection. They are showing a life that is easier, is more simple, is more idyllic than the secular life that other women lead. And especially a lot of these trad wives actually reject other women for having empowerment. And I know that doesn't come across with all of these cute baking videos and things like that, but if you really dig deeper into the belief system of a lot of the trad wives, you'll find it there. And honestly, you don't really have to dig that deep to figure out that there is something wrong with this picture. When it comes to feminism, feminism takes a lot of different forms. And for some people, this might fall into their definition of feminism, allowing women the freedom to choose their path in life. But for a lot of people, that doesn't really vibe with what our conception of feminism is. I think that most feminists can agree that feminism is not about the individual, but more about the collective empowerment of a group of people. And I think that these trad wives just kind of don't feed into that. They actually align themselves more with the patriarchy instead of aligning themselves with not even the matriarchy, just women in general. These women are the ultimate pick-me's. I know that some of you may not agree, and some of you may be like, you're tearing down women in the sake of promoting feminism. And I can see where you're coming from for that, but I think that it's important to twist this and see that trad wives are not concerned with women's empowerment, are not concerned with women who don't think and act like them. They actually degrade and demean women who want to have more than just motherhood, or who want to have motherhood but it looks a different way, or who want a career, things like that. A lot of these women would never build up another woman. They align themselves so heavily with the patriarchy that they see that a woman who has any other viewpoints or ideas of things or conceptions about their life that don't align with theirs as somebody who should not be celebrated, somebody who should not be brought forth. They actively, in their idolatry and their different ideologies, actually tear down women as a whole. And so I think it's fair to criticize them and look at them more closely. And again, just be really mindful of what message they're trying to perpetuate and what mission they're actually after. But that is all I have for you today. I know that this was kind of a divisive topic. Some people may think that this is not a big deal. Some people might say it's the worst thing in the world. It's just interesting to look at these women and understand that there's something else going on. That is all I have for you today. I hope you had a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one.